Welcome to Unscripted with Alex. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining me and having this conversation today and sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So it's going to be a vulnerable story that you're sharing, so take your time throughout all of it. We're going to be talking about your IVF experience, loss that you had throughout that experience.
Yeah.
And then we've got a second part to it as well where you've had a donation that you've provided. So it's quite a big episode that we're going to split into two parts. But let's start off at the start with your IVF experience. So you have written some blog posts around this and you wrote something that I found to be very interesting that I had never sort of thought of before. And this was around your decision to going down the IVF pathway. You had a conversation with your dad.
Yes.
And he basically said, have you ever taken a pill or used any protection to prevent a pregnancy?
Yes.
And you were like, yeah, of course. And he said, what's the difference then between doing that and using a medical intervention of some kind to create a birth?
Yes. So prior to deciding to do IVF, I tried pretty much everything, like all the natural alternatives, another medication called Clomid.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I tried absolutely everything and I really didn't want to do IVF because I felt like it was really meddlesome, and I thought, what if I'm just not meant to have a baby? And if I'm trying to force this pregnancy, what if I end up with something not good, basically, if I ended up with an unwell child or something was to happen. So I guess a bit scared to also think that I was potentially forcing something that wasn't meant to happen. And I guess I didn't really understand much about IVF. I'd kind of just decided from the beginning that I wasn't going to go that far, because when I actually met my husband, I said to him, look, if you want babies, don't date me because I don't want children.
Oh, really?
$50,000 later.
I do want children.
I changed my mind. So from the beginning, I was kind of like, I'm not convinced. But I started to sit down with my dad, and he just really kind of put it into perspective about what's the difference. Like, you've used medicine to avoid being pregnant, so why not use medicine to get pregnant? And there was just something in that I was like, you know what, I am being weird about it. And so then I actually started really looking into it and properly considering it, and probably, doing a bit more research, which I hadn't done before that. I thought, I just didn't want to do it.
Mm. So did you say 23 or 25 when you first started?
Would have been 20. Well, it would have been 23. So I knew pretty much. So I got married when I was 23, and then right from the beginning, from when we got married, basically, we started trying, because I knew that I was always going to have an issue based on my period being so irregular. Like, I only got my period when I was 15, so fairly late compared to everyone else. But even then, the cycle was 80 days, 20 days, 30 days. It was just out of control. And so I went on the pill really early to try and regulate that. And so I just kind of thought, I'm just not going to have any luck here from my previous experiences of my cycle. And I was correct. As soon as I went off the pill, my cycle was I've got diaries of me tracking my cycle for months and months and months, of how long I would bleed for, how long it was until I bled again. And there was literally one cycle that was 80 days. And I'm like, how do I figure out when I'm ovulating in that 80 days? So through all the tracking before we actually started doing any kind of medical support or alternatives to try and help us conceive, I was doing all that tracking. I was doing temperature, I was doing the spits or the saliva tests, the mucus tests, checking my cervix, all these other things, and I could just never pinpoint. I took it to the doctor, 3 months of temperatures, and she was like, this doesn't tell me anything. So I literally, when I turned 23, we started trying. I gave it 6 months, and then we went straight to the doctor, and I told them I'd been trying for 12 months because I had heard that unless you've been trying for 12 months, because that's kind of an average normal time to fall pregnant, a doctor's not going to take you seriously, or they're just going to say, give it another 6 months. So I just lied.
Yeah. Like, let's speed this process up.
I know where this is going.
Yeah.
So I just said to them, look, I've been trying for 12 months. So at that point, they straight away just got my husband in, tested him, did all sorts of hormone tests on me. I had a laparoscopy and dye to check that I didn't have endo.
And was anything picked up, or just that your cycle was just random?
We just, we have no idea. It's totally unexplained infertility for me. My husband's completely fine, but there's something in that where the sperm and the egg meet, or me ovulating, that just doesn't happen. So even like on the Clomid, which makes you ovulate, and being like having tests regularly to check my blood tests to check ovulating. Even then, like even when that was perfect, we still weren't falling pregnant. So I imagine there's something to do with where they weren't actually meeting in my body, perhaps. Yeah, we don't really know what it was, and because we've tried everything, like it was just like, this is like the last thing we can try.
I mean, the body is such a mystery, and we are kind of told this story that your cycle is 28 days and you ovulate around day 14, and it's a nice, beautiful little graph.
Don't have sex because you'll fall pregnant.
Yeah. Which apparently, you fall pregnant at the drop of a hat when you're in high school. Exactly. When you try, it's not always that way.
Exactly.
Everyone's cycle can be very different. And so, you may never really know. And so once you went to that doctor's appointment, was that where IVF conversation started, or did you still have to sort of work through that process in your mind first?
So they'll do like 3 months of the Clomid, or 3 cycles of Clomid, and then after that, so obviously I had the operation to check for endo, which was and PCOS. There was nothing like that in there. It was totally normal. From that point, I think we actually moved to Perth, and I went to King Eddie at that point, and I had given them my previous, like once I'd done those 3 months of Clomid with this particular other doctor, he was like, IVF's your next option unless you want to try alternatives and just try a natural, falling pregnant naturally. So I went to King Eddie. I spoke to them and told them our history, and they actually put me on another round of Clomid, which you're not actually supposed to do because you just end up ovulating all your eggs out.
Oh, right.
Because we've only got so many eggs, the Clomid forces you to ovulate, and you can't actually tell how many eggs you're ovulating. So they don't like to do it for too long because, they don't want you to waste all your eggs if it's not going to work. They actually put me on another 3 months of Clomid, and to be honest, the Clomid was 10 times worse than any IVF drug I've been on, 100%. I would never go on Clomid. I would totally skip it. Just don't even bother with it. Go straight to an IVF clinic and try IUI. So that's the intrauterine insemination, where it's like a turkey baster, and they'll like track your ovulation and they do it that way. Whereas the Clomid, either basically handed some pills and said, go home and try. Like we tried, at one point, we had sex every single day for an entire cycle, and that was horrendous.
Exhausting.
Even my husband, like after a week, he was like, this is not a good month.
In theory, that sounds like it should be a good thing, but
really not. It's like,
all right, it's time.
It's just like, come on, big boy, just
let's do it.
Get it done.
So what was happening with you in response to the Clomid?
Just extremely hormonal, weight gain, acne, like the mood swings were insane. Like and just being so irrational and just unstable, I felt the whole time. Partly, you're going through this medication to try and get pregnant and it's not working, which doesn't help the matter that you're going through this hormone treatment. But I just found the effects of it on my hormones and, all those things that can be triggered with a hormone change just went out of control for me. Like, really bad skin, weight gain, really, really, really moody, like so bad. Like my husband was getting ready to divorce me, I reckon. He was like, breathe.
So I'm being made to sleep with you every night and you're yelling at me.
You're being a bitch the entire time. Yes, pretty much.
So then you started the IVF process after another 3 months.
Yeah, I took some time off after that 3 months because when I spoke to King Eddie, they did say, we'll put you on the IVF waitlist, but it's a 3-year waitlist for IVF in the public system. So that's to not pay for it. And they hadn't actually, as well, they weren't running that program at the time. So it was like, well, wow, 3 years is a really long time to wait. And that's at the point where we started trying naturopathy, homeopathy, just, not exercising, eating certain foods, doing all that kind of stuff, trying absolutely everything else before that's when I kind of started having those conversations with my dad going, I don't know what to do, nothing's working. And then, when I kind of came around to the idea of IVF, I did a lot of research as to which clinic to go with, and that's based on their stats and also just the reputations of those doctors. So I went to a clinic in Applecross, and from there we just started the process of IVF, which is doing tests, and more tests before you actually do anything.
And those tests are to check hormonal levels primarily, or other
genetic things. So my husband's sperm got totally tested again. So I don't know how many samples my husband's ever had to give, but he is like, doesn't want to even look at a cup anymore. He's just like, oh, PTSD from doing it into cups. Doing samples like that, having ultrasounds, doing blood tests, doing, the DNA sort of blood tests where they look at any genetic disabilities that might pop up or like genetic conditions that could be passed down, trying to basically figure out, is there a genetic reason that you're not falling pregnant, as well as, them just not actually meeting or hormonal. So tests like that, and a lot of paperwork and a lot of waiting for those results to come in until they say, yep, you're a good candidate for IVF.
Wow, it's such a big process already. Yeah. Far out. I think unless you're going through it, it's not something that you would really understand just how tiresome and taxing on your body that is. Yeah, and the constant blood tests. I have, when I get a blood test now, they're like, oh, you've had a lot of needles. I'm wow. Yes, I have. I know where the good vein is as well.
Just go right here.
It's right here.
See the big hole in my arm? Just right behind that hole.
Oh, you poor thing.
Yeah.
And so now, how many years has it been before you get your actual first round?
So I think from the time of contacting the IVF clinic, it would have been maybe 6 months, or because you've got to wait for appointments and that kind of thing. Probably 6 months for all those tests to come back, and then to finally get your appointment to start. So once you start the cycling, so this is a collection cycle because it depends what kind of IVF you're doing. Like if you're doing IUI, you don't necessarily need to do a collection because they're not taking any eggs out of you. They're just getting your hormones to a point where you, on paper and clinically, are ovulating so that they can then have the sperm ready to put in at the perfect time.
Is that the turkey-based method?
Yeah, that's
that one. So that's like an assisted fertility.
Basically, I've got a few friends who've done that, like if their husbands have been FIFO and they just haven't been able to be in the same place at the right time. Yeah, there's different types. But for me, obviously, we were going to be harvesting some eggs, and my husband has donated, harvesting his sperm. So the first round, it's a bit of a trial and error. Like I wasn't expecting the first round to go very well, and it didn't. So the first collection cycle, you're stimulated to ovulate, and throughout that they're doing blood tests and scans to check how many follicles are on your ovaries and just to check your hormones levels, because then they can kind of tell based on that when the eggs are going to be ripe to harvest, or when they get to a certain size and your blood is saying a certain thing. I don't know the technical terms for it all, but this is my understanding. And then they decide, we'll give you this trigger, which triggers your body to ripen the eggs within 24 hours or 48 hours, and then you go in for a collection. They're constantly measuring the follicles to see how big they are, to see how ripe they are. And even though you've got a follicle, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got a mature egg in there. So it's a bit of a gamble. So I went in not really expecting very much, and I didn't really get very much out of it. I think we got 3 eggs. And so what they do is they collect the eggs, and at the same time your husband or the donor, wherever you're getting your sperm from, is doing their donation or being defrosted. And so once they've got the eggs, they literally go straight to the clinic and then they do the fertilisation. it's kind of all it's timed all perfectly. Like there's really not very much room for error. And so we had 3 eggs collected and I think 2 fertilised, and they've only got until 6 days to actually reach a blastocyst stage, which is the stage just before they hatch, and it's like a certain amount of cells. So the best case is a 5-day blastocyst or embryo, and they give it 6 days. If it's a good-looking embryo and they're like, oh, it might make it, then they'll give it that extra that extra day. So we got 2 embryos. Basically, from then.
So this is all in a petri dish.
Yeah, this is all in a petri dish, and there's so many variables. So for us, we had a fresh transfer. So there's a fresh transfer or a frozen transfer. We did the operation to get the eggs out, and then we had 5 days, and after 5 days, we had an egg transfer. So or embryo transfer, should I say? The other embryo was frozen. So this was a fresh transfer, and that turned into nothing. We didn't get pregnant. It wasn't a miscarriage. It was just nothing. So when that happens, it's kind of this point where you're like, it becomes a time thing. Like for that to happen, it's devastating that didn't happen. But for you to try again, you've got to wait an entire cycle. You've got to wait to get your period again, and then you've got to wait until your bloods get to the right point again for you to. And so from that point where you have your period after that cycle that didn't work, you have start your hormone treatment again, which is a needle every day. Or 2. Depends what medications they use and things like that. But for me, it was a needle every day up until a certain point. So when it's just a transfer cycle, you don't have to have the trigger needle. It's just the one kind of needle. And then maybe there's another one. There might be another. I can't tell.
I mean, there's obviously so many. So hang on. So with this one, so the first one was the fresh transfer. And then the other egg, because you had 2 eggs, the other one was frozen.
Yes.
So for the second round, we're just trying to prep the body, get it all nice and juicy and ready for this frozen egg to be then put in.
Yes,
is that correct? So that your uterus is all
it's all delicious
good to go.
and nice and smushy and ready for an embryo to implant. Yeah. So we got to the point where we're like, yep, it's been booked in. This is the day you're going to have your transfer. Fantastic. We got a call the morning of the transfer, and the embryo didn't survive the thaw.
Oh my God.
Straight then we didn't even get to do a transfer. So that's a whole another month of cycling that we have didn't wait. Obviously, I look at it now, I'm like, didn't get wasted because we got there eventually. But, it's just a whole another month that you've spent waiting. So for us, we didn't have any embryos left after that, so we had to do another collection cycle. So this time, because they had my history from the last cycle, they changed my medications up. And when I went in for my collection, we actually got 21 eggs, which was amazing.
Wow. So from the first one, we had 2. 3 and 1 didn't make it. Okay, to the next one, 21.
So that's a bit too many. That's being overstimulated. So when we collected that, they automatically were like, you can't do a fresh cycle. You need to let your body recover, and then we'll get your hormones back to a base level and then start again. So from that 21, we got 14 fertilised, but only 12 made it to day 6. So we had a bunch of day 5s, but they had a couple more day 6s. So we had 12 viable embryos in the freezer from that point, which was amazing because going from 2 to 12, I was like, this is so many opportunities. But from that point, when I was like, wow, we've got 12, I was like, I can't do this 12 times. This is so that kind of plays into part as to how I knew what was going to happen with any leftovers. Because from that point, I was like, there's going to be leftovers. I'm not going to keep going. That's when I started thinking about what happens to those leftovers. But anyway, so we had that they're all frozen. So we went into a new cycle, and we had a frozen transfer, and I fell pregnant with my daughter. And that was the first pregnancy I ever had. And I actually thought that I thought I was having my period because I had spotting. So you have your transfer, and then you've got the 10 days or the 2-week wait, which is horrendous. It's 2 weeks of waiting for that blood test to find out if you're pregnant or not, was absolutely horrendous. It's such a long time to wait, and they tell you not to do a test. And, I was like, no, I won't do a test because I don't want to get a false negative and be disappointed when it might be a positive, or like get a positive and then by the time I get my test, it's a negative. So I just totally left it. And
it just all feels like it's such an anxious waiting game, a constant thing on your mind.
It is really
I just
hard.
want to jump back just a point.
Yeah.
After you had that overstimulation, how were you feeling in your body?
Yeah, so I was definitely on the couch for a couple of days. So every egg that they've harvested is a needle prick in your ovary. So you've been stabbed 21 times, possibly even more, because they literally pop every single follicle and get whatever is in there. So there may have been more follicles, but it was only 21 mature eggs. So,
and how are they doing this? Because
it's
just
okay.
like in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, there's a needle going into like this ovary collecting eggs, but this is inside your body.
Yes, it is.
So how are you awake? Are you asleep?
It's an operation, so you're fully asleep, and it's a transvaginal oocyte collection. So you go through the vaginal wall. So they basically have you with your garden on display, and then they have like the quacky thing that opens you up, and then they put the needle through the wall of your vagina, and then that goes up into your abdomen or up to find your ovaries, basically. So they might do that two sides, or depending on where your ovaries are sitting, because it's obviously not going to be perfect. And then that's how they do it. Yeah, so you're quite sore because you've had a team of doctors down there. But it's all done on such a small scale as well. So, think about how small an egg is. It's not a giant needle that we would get in our arm. It's a microscopic sort of extremely small needle, but they're still in there moving your body, like in your guts around to try and like get to all the sides of the ovary. So, I was pretty bruised. I felt very bruised and sore and just achy for the next 2 or 3 days, and quite bloated as well. Yeah. But like other than just like localized pain or discomfort, that was pretty much the only thing. Like when I had the laparoscopy, that's different because they fill your body up with the gas, and then you get the back pain from like the shoulder pain and stuff from the CO2 gas that they fill your tummy up with. So it wasn't probably as bad as the laparoscopy, but
and what about energy and emotions and stuff? Were you
it's a big emotional
dump?
dump. Yeah, huge, because you've been overstimulated, and then as well you get that hit that you've got to wait another month to have a transfer. You're just like, oh my God. But it's that kind of silver lining. You're like, oh, I just got 12. But if you didn't get 12, you'd just be like, this is devastating.
Yeah. And what did you do during that time to help process it all, like just in mindfulness or trying to wait out that time? Did you do anything, or did you kind of just sit in it?
No, at that time I didn't really do any mindfulness or anything like that. I pretty much just sat on the couch and
rolled with it.
Yeah, ate chocolate and relaxed and just thought, I've got a whole week, I've got a month up my sleeve to just relax, and I can't do anything more about it. We've got all these eggs, because like as soon as you get out, the first thing goes, how many eggs do you get? They go 21. I'm like, oh, we've got some good odds here. So like as the next kind of 5 days, the clinic is always calling you and going, oh, we've got some really good ones. They give you an update of your embryos throughout the next 5 days. So you're constantly waiting for the call to be like, how many made it?
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing that you said there was you got a little bit of spotting bleeding. So it is common to get a little bit of bleeding when an implantation is happening.
So on that too, so I had the blood test booked in for the end of the 2-week wait. The last cycle where there was no pregnancy with that one embryo, I didn't get my period until after I had the blood test. So like I was like, okay, I was thinking I haven't got my period yet. I might be pregnant. And then I went and got my blood test in the morning. I'm like, yay. And then I got my period at lunchtime. I was like, you are kidding me. And then I got the call saying, no, you're not pregnant. I'm really sorry. And so this time I went and got my blood test, and I was like, I still haven't got my period. I might be pregnant again. And then I got spotting at lunchtime, and I was like, you are kidding me. I was like, again. And so I like literally went home from work, and I was just devastated. Like,
so you just took it straight away?
I took it as I was getting my period. Didn't even bother doing a pregnancy test to check. my husband was like devastated, called my mum, having a cry to my mum. I was like, oh, it's not happening. Like, it's just not going to come back. And we're sitting there and we still hadn't had this call from the clinic. And I was thinking, the clinic called by now, like last time. They called at lunchtime. And it's like getting towards 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And I'm like, still haven't had this call. So I called them. I said, hey, I'm just chasing up my results. Like, you know, just wanting confirmation of what I thought I already knew. And they're like, yep, everything looks great. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, congratulations, you're pregnant. And I was like, no. I was like, I'm getting my period. And she's like, no, the blood tests from this morning say that your pregnancy is tracking beautifully. Like, your hormones are great. You're probably just spotting from the implantation. And like, so then it went from like total despair of like, that's it, we're going out tonight, getting a great bottle of wine and just getting fat to like, oh my God, I
can't touch alcohol now for another like
what do I do?
12 months even if you're breastfeeding.
Yeah, and I said to her, I was like, so what do we do now? And she's like, nothing. She's like, we'll get in touch with you in your next appointment to like track how the pregnancy's going and congratulations, the end. I was like, what?
So did you jump straight, like was your husband there at the time?
He was there at the time and because like I didn't have them on speaker because I wasn't expecting like this grand announcement. And just like I just looked to my husband like, I'm pregnant. And he's like, what? And so it was just like this real total weird, confused, like we just went from one extreme to the other. So it was a really amazing moment. And then I called my mum back and I'm like, I'm so sorry to do that to you, but I'm actually pregnant. And she was like bawling her eyes out. And it was a really, really lovely sort of thing. But it was like this moment of disbelief because by this point it had been like 5 years of trying to get pregnant, just to get pregnant. And
did you get like straight on to your apps like what to do with pregnancy?
Yeah, I was like, I don't even know. That's why I said to her, I was like, what do I do now? And I was like, I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to be pregnant.
You don't have to be qualified to be pregnant. You're a woman.
It's like when you get your baby, you're like, what do I do now? I don't feel like I should be allowed to take this creature home.
Yeah,
don't I need a certificate?
Oh my gosh. And so now over those next few months, how are you feeling? Are you anxious that you're going to hold it or
Yeah, I think
what?
for my first pregnancy, I wasn't anxious at all. I was just like, yes, we're pregnant. Like for me, that was the biggest hurdle was actually getting pregnant at that point. And so the pregnancy went perfectly well. Like I had no issues. I had a really comfortable pregnancy. I had a few things like there's that thing where your pelvis moves too much. I'll come up with a name in a minute.
Something pubis. It's like pubis, inflammation.
Symphysis pubis dysfunction.
Yeah.
So I had that from really early on. So the relaxin really kicked in and I was very bendy for quite some time. So I had to wear like the brace for a really long time or like from very early on.
What did that feel like?
Oh, incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you can't sit down. I was like working an office job and I was like, I can't sit down in this. So, and my office was like, I was working in local government at the time and my office was so far away from the front counter and I would always be having people come and want to speak to me, like at the actual office chambers sort of thing. I was just like, oh, so I'd have to walk the longest way. And then by the time I got up to like 8 months, I was just like, I need to move my desk. This is not working.
I'm surprised you made it up to 8 months.
I literally gave birth at 35 and 5. So I had pregnancy was great. Everything was looking normal. There was no reason to think that I was going to go early. And then I was going to finish on the Friday, but I just said to them, I said, look, on the Wednesday, so I'm going to finish on the Wednesday and just take like a week down south. And they're like, yep, cool, no worries. So I finished on the Wednesday, jumped in the car. We came down here. Oh, no, it must have been Thursday. Yeah, Thursday morning we jumped in the car, came down south, and Thursday night my waters broke. I know, I was like, so much for this baby moon of like going away. So 35 and 5, and because they don't birth children here and they don't birth children in Bunbury.
Oh, you had to go back to Perth.
I had to go straight back up to Perth, so I got ambulance. And it was like, it wasn't an emergency situation. Like my waters just popped and I was like, oh, what do I do now? And so I went to the hospital. And so I wasn't like in labour. I was kind of just sitting around waiting for labour to start. So they were like, oh, you're kind of at that point where we don't want to hold you from having your baby, but we're not going to make it come on quicker. So we're just going to wait.
So firstly, talk about intuition.
I know, right?
There's that. I'm sure women's intuition gets stronger from pregnancy and as a mum.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
And that was definitely like a little sign.
I don't know why. I just like, I'm just going to... And one of my friends, I said to my friend, on the Thursday, I was like, we're just going to go down to Busso for the weekend and like hang out with mum and dad before we have the baby. And she's like, are you sure you should be going that far away, this close to being, giving
baby
birth?
mood.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. Like no one gives birth at 35 weeks. And I do.
So your waters had broken. You had to go back to Perth. And because sometimes when the water breaks, they put you on a bit of a timer and you've got to basically birth within 24 hours because they're afraid of infection, or they try to want to move things along in the first sort of 24, 48 hours.
Because it was preemie, they didn't want to move it along. They were like, okay. They didn't that's why they said. It was kind of like, we're not going to move you along. Like normally we would either get you moving, or we'd stop you. Like stop this by giving you medication. And they just said, we're just going to let it happen naturally because baby was a good size. There was really no other factor that would have had them concerned about anything. Like she was a healthy baby by all means. And she was, like when she was born, she was a normal sized baby. So I'm kind of glad I didn't go to 40 weeks because she would have been giant.
What was she?
She was like 7 pounds.
Okay.
So like a normal baby. Average baby.
And were you in hospital then being monitored from that point?
Yeah, so from the point of presenting with my waters had been broken, that was it. I was in hospital. They wouldn't let me have a bathing or anything, so I never got that. But she was posterior, so I had really bad pain. Like I had an epidural as quickly as I could because the back labour was just incredible. Like my hat's off to any woman who does not use pain medication for giving birth. Like I just think they're wonder women. I couldn't do it.
Everybody is different, and like you said, it depends on the positioning of baby and all sorts of things that come into play as to birthing. Yeah, and whether you do it with medication or without medication, or C-section or without. If you feel happy and empowered by your birth, then that's the best.
Well, I never went to any birthing classes. I never even thought about a birth plan. Like it was like when I went in, they're like, what's your birth plan? I'm like, whatever you guys tell me to do. Like,
get the baby out.
Get it out. Like, I don't know. I was like, I didn't really, all I knew that I didn't want forceps or the vacuum. And if we could avoid a C-section, then that's great. But like medication-wise, I was like, oh, no, I'm happy to if it's too painful, I'm having an epidural. Like, there's no point in doing it if I don't have to.
But all of that is your birth plan.
Yeah, I suppose.
Though you already had some ideas in your mind of what you wanted. Yeah. So that's sort of.
I see like Instagram pages now of women that have these most beautiful like altars and like these beautiful like hypno things and essential oils and stuff. And I'm like, I wish I had have thought about it a bit more because I could have made it a bit more special. But I don't know. I think we're just at that point where we just wanted a baby. I was like, I don't even care how it gets here. Just get it out and put it in my arms.
And so how long did that take then from when your water broke to when your baby was born?
It would have been 32 hours. So it would have been 24 hours of just kind of sitting in hospital beds waiting for something to happen. And it slowly did happening, but it just wasn't actually active. It was just kind of a bit painful, a bit uncomfortable. But then when it kicked in labour, like active labour, or like me being in the birthing suite would have only been 6 hours.
Okay.
So she did actually come pretty quickly, I suppose, because I know there's some people that spend a really long time in that birthing suite.
And as soon as the pain kicked in, you had the epidural, and then was it just you and your husband sitting there just chilling out, waiting?
Well, no, it was my husband falling asleep on the bed over there and me just talking to the nurse, and she's like, you need to just have a bit of rest now. And I'm like, oh, but I'm chatty. Like I was just like having a good old chat. But yeah, like it was just my mum did come up because she was part of our kind of plan. She chucked the dog because we took the dog down to Bustleton with us as well. So she chucked him in her car and all the stuff that she would need for like a week because she was going to stay with us for the first week. And that was part of my plan as well. I was like, I wanted that support. Mum was like, I'll cook you all your food and wash all your clothes and everything. Yeah. That didn't happen with the second child, which it would have actually been better. But with the first child, she came and she gave us the best royal treatment possible. So, and she never actually experienced her own births. She had an emergency C-section with both me and my sister. And so back then they didn't have epidurals, they just knocked them out.
Oh, so wow.
She never actually got to have her really give birth to her children. She kind of went to sleep pregnant, woke up not pregnant with a baby. Like she was going to watch my sister's pregnancies or at births, but she ended up having emergency C-sections as well. So I'd said to her, yes, absolutely, you can come to my births. Like, you're welcome. So my mum was there as well, but she kind of just hung back and she just watched. But so she was there as well, which was really nice.
Oh, that's such an amazing, precious thing to share. My mum was at mine as well, and I loved that.
I loved it as well. There. It's one of those things, you've got to have the matriarch, or like, it's just, I feel like that's really a tribal sort of thing that, women having the women's circles and stuff, you've got to have that kind of circle of women around you as well. And I'm like, he's not going to know, like my husband, as much as he can give me his sympathy or like, attention, he doesn't know exactly what I'm going through. Whereas mum, she's done labour. She knows exactly what I'm going through. So again, my birth wasn't that one where I needed help because I'd had epidural. I was just chilling for most of the time. So, and then even, the pushing stage was not really that long. Like, it would have been like an hour of pushing maybe. Okay. Or not even. I don't even know. See, that's the thing. I don't even know how long I pushed for. I wasn't looking at a clock.
I think I must have checked in. I know that my pushing was an hour, and I don't know how I know that. Now that you've said that, I don't know, because you're not really aware of time.
No, not at all.
So I'm not sure how I knew that, but I must have been tracking it somehow. Because actually, I do remember my mum saying, "You'll have your baby. You'll be born by 2 or something," and I was born at 3. So, I think that must have been where that came in. Anyway, so you finally, you had your baby. That's amazing.
And I had retained placenta as well. So I literally got my baby and then I could feel them doing things down there and like tugging on things. And then they were like, okay, well, just give the baby to your husband and we're going to have to go and remove your placenta manually. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this was fine. Like, this is my first one. I just didn't think any different of it. And so I gave my baby to my husband or our baby to my husband. And then I was wheeled off to theatre and the placement of the epidural was actually quite high or a bit higher. So when they did total spinal block, and it was this, honestly, the most interesting thing of this birth was getting the placenta removed, because I remember watching it, that I was wheeled into this thing and they had these big stirrups and I put my legs into these stirrups and they literally strap your legs in really tightly to these stirrups, and there's a sheet going across between your knees so you can't really see very much. Your spine's totally, like, you can't feel anything, you're totally numb. And I saw this woman put on a glove all the way up to her shoulder. And she literally was elbow deep in my vagina scraping out this placenta. And I saw her lift her elbow up above the sheet and there was like blood and stuff. And I just see her like flicking her hand.
Oh my gosh. How did you process that?
Well, I was kind of just like, oh, okay. And then that's when I started to kind of get a little bit like, oh, and I was like, I can't feel myself breathing because the epidural was so high. I couldn't actually feel myself breathing. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I'm not breathing. And then the doctor was like, good night. Just gave me something else and
so
just totally knocked it. I started to panic
attack.
And he was like, the anaesthetist was like, yeah, she needs to go to sleep. So
they should have given you maybe a pre-warning not to look down at what's going on.
I don't know.
I don't think anybody wants to see a big glove going on up to the shoulder.
I couldn't feel it. It was just like, it was just bizarre watching it because I was like, and like in my head I'm going, it's literally someone elbow deep in my vagina right now and I can't feel it. Like,
and now I can't breathe.
And now I can't breathe. And now I'm not breathing. So by the time I actually woke up from that and then by the time that when it happened and I got back to my baby would have been 3 or 4 hours. And so even they didn't really communicate a great deal to my husband. So he was kind of thinking, oh, she's been gone for a while. Like, I hope everything's okay. So yeah, for me, that was just my normal baby experience. It was nice. Like, I didn't have anything to compare it to, but it was entertaining, I suppose.
So from that birth, how long did it take you to decide to try and conceive again? Because obviously with conceiving again, there's lots of things coming into play. One, you already have one baby and you're trying to manage timing and you've got a toddler running around. And 2, you're probably thinking about those frozen embryos?
Yes. So for me, again, it was a timeline thing. I didn't want to waste any more time. I felt like every month that I had my period that we weren't actively trying to have a child or doing IVF was a wasted month. I didn't breastfeed for very long. I only breastfed for 6 weeks with my daughter because I had dysphoric milk ejection reflex. So
that's right.
And I didn't know at the time that that's what it was. I just thought I hated it. I hated breastfeeding. And even when I went into my next birth, I was like, I was thinking about the milk, and I was thinking I would rather give birth 3 times than breastfeed, because the feeling of it was just so horrible. But I didn't know that at the time. I only found that out with my son. But
so obviously that's going to be a big topic in itself, but can you just give us a quick snapshot of what is it and what does it feel like?
So the dysphoric milk ejection reflex is when you have a letdown, you have a decrease in dopamine and an increase in estrogen, and you get this kind of feeling of dread in your gut, and I guess really negative emotions and it's like it just makes you feel sick. In your head as well, you're like, you're not thinking nice things in your head either. Like, I was really resenting my child, and I was to the point where I was wondering if I was having postnatal depression but it was only when I was breastfeeding, and it was just in the first 5 minutes of breastfeeding. Because she was preemie, she was syringe fed and express fed from the very beginning, because she didn't have the latch and she was jaundice, so she couldn't stay awake long enough to feed. And she just didn't have that suck yet. So by the time I was ready to actually breastfeed, she had gotten so used to the bottle that she just couldn't latch. And because of this feeling, I just wanted to push the baby away. I just didn't want it on me. I was like, just get it off me. I can't deal with this feeling. And I just thought that was breastfeeding. I just thought that's what breastfeeding was, and I just thought most women just power through. As well, I had a really painful letdown. So it was just this cocktail of horrible feelings for me. And so I only bottle express fed her for 6 weeks, and then I just went straight on to the formula. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's an odd kind of thing, and I only found out about it with my son. So, which at that point when I did find out that, I was like, oh, I get it. And so when I understood those feelings and understood what the condition was, it was so much easier to manage and actually work through the feelings and the physical and the mental feelings that came along with that. And eventually over time it became less and less and less and less, and I was able to breastfeed quite happily, and I enjoyed breastfeeding at the end. So I breastfed my son for 18 months.
Far out. That's amazing.
So, but it was just basically just being able to, having a child that was good at breastfeeding, and 2, just knowing what I was dealing with, and just knowing the beast that was DEMA, dysphoric milk ejection reflex. But that's the thing, probably a lot more women have it, but they don't actually know about it, and they just think breastfeeding's not for me.
I can imagine that would give you a very strange sense of mum guilt, feeling like,
oh yeah,
you should be breastfeeding and enjoying this moment, but you would hating it inside.
Yeah. Even now thinking about it makes me feel sick. I just think, the feeling of breastfeeding to me was just horrendous.
Because you stopped breastfeeding earlier, or at 6 weeks, sorry. Did that mean that your period came back earlier?
Yes, I got my period back earlier. So we did try. I thought maybe the IVF has kicked my hormones into gear, and maybe I'll be one of those people that just miraculously falls pregnant after IVF. No, I was not. So we pretty much started trying about 3 months, or maybe not 3 months, maybe 6 months. And no, nothing was really happening. So when we realised that nothing was going to happen, we kind of said, okay, what kind of age gap do we want for our kids? And so it was around about that. They would have been about 2 years apart, but that's how the timing that we worked it out. So I don't know how many months that is, a year basically. Yeah. We started looking into IVF again because we knew you've got to wait and you've got to do the cycle, and then there's just all the waiting in between. So. And as well, there was no guarantee that we were going to get pregnant. So, yeah, at about a year or maybe 13 or 14 months maybe, we went again. We went back to the clinic and we're like, we're ready to try again. And we did so they're all frozen transfers from this point because all the embryos are frozen. So we did one transfer, which was no result. So we didn't get pregnant. Then we did another transfer, and I did fall pregnant to that one, and we lost that pregnancy at 6 weeks. And it was really odd, that thing you're talking about, intuition. When I fell pregnant. So with IVF, most women may not even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks just because life gets in the way. You're not necessarily tracking your pregnancy. But with IVF, you know from the very moment you've had that transfer that you're potentially pregnant. So that puts you 2 weeks ahead. So once you find out, you've already been pregnant a month by the way that the calculator works. So, but whereas like, technically it's only 2 weeks, but it's a month. So because we're having the blood tests, the hormone, like the HCG levels, you're getting those tracked. So you pretty much know from the moment you're pregnant, you're tracking it. So
seeing it go up and up and
you're
up.
seeing it going up. So most people wouldn't even know. But this whole time this 2 or 3 weeks that I'd been pregnant, I was like, I had this feeling like, I can't even explain it. There was no physiological basis. Like I hadn't had any like physical feelings of this, but I just felt in me that this pregnancy was not the pregnancy. This pregnancy was not the one. Mm-hmm. I actually was working, and I said to my friend, she's like, how are you feeling? My colleague. And I was like, oh yeah. I said, I don't know. I just feel like this pregnancy is just not going to be the one. I feel like I'm going to miscarry for some reason. I said, wow. Not based on anything, but I just feel like that. And then that afternoon, I got a call from the clinic because I'd had a blood test in the morning, and they're like, yeah, look, your HCG levels are going down, so we're fully expecting this pregnancy to be a miscarriage. And I was like, I actually knew that. Like, so I was disappointed, obviously, because of the time thing. Like, it was a really huge. I'm going to keep going back to it because the timeline thing for me was such a big deal. But I was like, oh, here we go. I've got to wait another whole month to try again. So it wasn't really the sadness in losing a child, because at that point, like, I hadn't actually connected with this pregnancy, I guess.
Yeah.
But
it was the fact that you had to start over.
Yeah, it's the start that I just had to keep starting over, and that was just a real mental hurdle for me. So anyway, so we lost that one at 6 weeks, and it was just like a normal period. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And so then once I had fully miscarried, and then we had to obviously wait for that to happen, we started cycling again, and that's when I fell pregnant with my son William. And yeah, then that pregnancy started a whole next chapter. So it was a completely normal pregnancy. He was actually quite a big baby, and so there was never any reason to necessarily look into any deeper into like the placenta or anything, or to have any. There was no reason to have any concerns. Basically, he was a big he was just a nice big chunky baby.
And your pregnancy, how were you feeling in those?
Totally normal. I wasn't anxious about, even the miscarriage didn't make me anxious from it. I mean, I probably did for the first 6 weeks the whole usual wait until the 12 weeks thing. But other than that, I don't even think we did a harmony test or anything. We didn't do one of those with Penny either. We kind of just went along with it. And then it's kind of weird because it's like I've got to jump back but jump forward. So we ended up losing William at 29 weeks, and I have this vivid memory of the last time I felt him, and it was actually like 24 hours after, I wasn't really I was at the time, was every night I was doing my kick count and waiting and feeling for him, and every now and then he'd be a little bit slow to kind of but it was normal pattern of movement for him. The last time I felt him was on the Wednesday night, and I just remember it was like a really painful thing, and the day before, and that day I'd actually seen the doctor. Like, I had the doctor's appointment on the Wednesday, and she was like, yep, it looks beautiful, he's happy, his heart rate was doing everything that a baby was meant to be doing. And then sometime between Wednesday at 7 o'clock or 7 p.m. until Thursday 5 p.m. he passed away. And I said to my husband, he was just about to leave for work because he works shifts, and I was sitting there with Penny, and I was like, he was literally just about to work. I said, I think I might just pop over to Mum's. I'll let you know, I'm going to go. I haven't felt him move today, really. I haven't felt him doing much today. So I'm a bit concerned. And I was like, I might pop over to Mum's and just, give Penny to Mum, and might pop down to the hospital because I'm just not really feeling him. And so I think at this point, my husband was at work. So I told him before he was at work that I had some concerns. And then when he was at work, because he works in Bunbury, we're down in Busso, I called him and said, I'm going to go to Mum's, drop PJ off, and I'm just going to go to the hospital just to check, just to be sure. So I was like, see you, Mum, be back in 20 minutes. And then, anyway, so I got to the reception, and I think at that point when I actually said to the person what is wrong, when they said, "Oh, is everything okay?" I said, "I haven't felt my baby move." And I think for me that was the point where I really started thinking, shit, I haven't felt my baby move. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
So anyway, so we're in at the hospital, and the midwife is there, and she must have been a student midwife, because she couldn't really find the heartbeat, but there was a pulse, there was a beat of something, and it would have been my heartbeat. But she's like, "Oh, I don't think we need to worry. I think I can hear it. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call your doctor anyway, just in case." And I was like, at that point, I was like, "Oh, phew, okay, I've dodged a bullet. Maybe he's okay." And then when my doctor came in, and sorry.
No, take a moment.
She came in and she had a slightly different machine, and as soon as she put it, like, this was an ultrasound machine, the other one was just like the Doppler and like the CTG thing, the pink bands. As soon as she came in and as soon as she put the ultrasound on my belly, I could just tell that he was gone. I could just tell, and yeah, there was just waiting. I think the sound waiting to hear a heartbeat, and no heartbeat was one of the worst things. And I was there by myself as well. Like, my husband was at work, so
you hadn't thought that?
I hadn't thought it was even a possibility. Like, I was like, when they said it, I was like, what? This doesn't happen to me. Like, this doesn't happen to people that I know. Like, how is this even real? Like, it just didn't feel real at all. Like, I'd kind of completely removed myself and disconnected from that moment. That, like, so reliving it is a really odd sensation, because I'm reliving something that I completely disconnected to myself to. So, like, I can only really recall what I was, like, as you know, do you get what I mean? Like, it was
a survival mechanism, I think, is to disconnect, like you've said, to what's going on, because it's unimaginable.
Yeah, so I basically called my husband, and I went into this mode. Like, I caught up with midwives and my doctor afterwards, and they said, I was saying the weirdest things. Like, I was saying, "It's okay, it's all right, we'll be okay, we'll be able to manage this, it's fine, we'll just make some changes and everything's going to be fine, we'll be fine, everything's going to be fine." Like, I just kept kind of going over and saying things like that. Like, I wasn't really processing it. I wasn't crying. Like, I was really sad, and I kind of cried a little bit, but I went into this really stoic sort of, "No, we've got this, it's okay, we'll manage, we'll survive, we'll just do what we have to do, and one thing that really hurts me thinking back about it is that I not only disconnected from the event, but I disconnected from him as well, my child. So I started calling him an it, and I started saying, just get it out. And I just wanted to really just not be living this moment. And, I think that's the hardest thing is the fact that I disconnected from him in that moment.
It's something that you did out of a way of coping and surviving. Yeah. It's not something that you should take on as being...
Yeah, well, like, I abandoned...
it was just in the... you didn't abandon him.
Yeah.
You've named him.
Yeah.
And you had a service for him, and you acknowledge him now.
Yeah. So, like, it was an odd timeline in that I found out that he had passed away, and I called my husband, and I can't even imagine what he went through. because, like, he was expecting me to call and say, yep, everything's fine. Yet I called him and said, hey, our baby's dead. And, you know, he's at work, so he... luckily, his work is amazing. They literally just got one of the guys that he was working with, just drove him home or drove him to the hospital, and he turned up at the hospital, and like we kind of just went from there. So there was a few... so the timeline's a bit odd in that we found out that he'd passed away. My husband came home and...
Did you go home
we went
together?
Home.
Did you wait in the hospital until he arrived?
No, we actually had to go to Bunbury to have him, and we don't really know... Well, since this happened, Bustleton midwife services, like the midwives and everything, have actually made changes in that Bustleton said that someone decided at Bustleton that they weren't equipped to let me give birth there, or they weren't able to let me give birth there. I had to go to Bunbury. So we went home, and because I wasn't in labour, he was like, nothing was happening. He was just dead. So we had this kind of day between when I found out. So I found out in the evening, like 9 o'clock, and then kind of hung around at the hospital, I suppose, for that night. And then in the morning we went home and packed our bags to go up to Bunbury. And then in Bunbury, they induced me. So I had the balloon Foley catheter thing, and that just kick-started labour. Like, I didn't have to have any medications to force it on or anything like that. And it was probably one of the most horrific births I've had of all of them. The epidural didn't work for the first time, so they had to come back and redo the epidural. And it was just the worst thing ever.
What did they say to you to help prepare you for doing that birth?
Well, they sent a chaplain in. It didn't really help us because he was just talking about religion, basically, and we're not religious, so we just kind of like, yep, okay, whatever.
Disconnected that, yeah.
Out you go, buddy. No, for us it was really the bigger decisions were if we were going to meet him. And at the time, because I had disconnected from it all, I had said no. I said, just get it out and let's just go home. And I think a midwife had said, I really think you should consider meeting your baby. And now, like, there is no way I was not going to meet him. Like, in that birthing suite, I was like, there is no way I'm leaving this hospital without seeing my baby. But I did ask them to, because we didn't know what was wrong. I was afraid that I was going to see a disfigured child or something that I didn't want to see. So I did actually ask them to take him, like, I gave birth. Sorry.
That's all right.
I gave birth and they took him and cleaned him up and put a beanie on him and brought him back all cute. And I am so lucky that I actually have a sister who's a photographer. Oh. And in that time between he died and giving birth, my sister had come up from Denmark, and when we were about to give birth, I called her because she was in Busso. I called her and said, yep, we're probably going to have the baby in the next hour. And so she came up, and literally between the time I gave birth and when they took him out, she came in, and like this just happened to be the time that she arrived. And so when they brought him in and we met him, she was there to take photos. And yeah, like she just took some of the most amazing photos, and I feel really sorry for people who don't have that service. There are actually a few photographers in Western Australia who offer that as a service for free.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So if there is anyone who loses their child and has the time to organise it, that there are photographers that will rush to a hospital and take photos for people who have lost a child. And my sister did decide to offer that service as well, but she found, I think she ended up having second thoughts because it was such a confronting moment for her, because it was her nephew as well as, it's for one, it's a baby that's passed away, but for her it was a family member as well.
Yeah.
And she just decided that she couldn't quite bring herself to do it again. So the photographers that do that are amazing because they literally are just watching the most rawest of emotions.
Yeah, gosh, that's such a that would be such a challenging.
It would be
thing
so
to
hard.
do.
Yeah, it would be extremely hard.
Was your family? Did your mum and dad come?
No, so we only held him and met him for maybe an hour. They did offer us like a crib that can keep the baby cold, but we just decided that we just met him and then said our goodbyes.
Did you name him then or afterwards?
I think we had named him while we were waiting to give a birth. Yeah, so we kind of knew what we were going to call him before he was born. Yeah, so when we did meet him, and we met him as William, definitely. But yeah, we only met him for about an hour, and then that was it. Then we returned to the bedroom and I basically just said, put me to sleep. So I slept for about 3 days with medicine because I just needed to not be, conscious. So, I got some medication and went straight to sleep. And then we left Bunbury, which was an extremely hard thing to do, leaving a baby behind.
Yeah, that is something nobody should ever have to do.
And then we went back to Busso Hospital and I spent, another couple of days there.
Just to look after you?
Just for me to recover because I'd just given birth and as soon as I'd given birth, it's like, I do not want any milk. I cannot deal with having breast milk. So I went on a medication to stop me getting any milk. But yeah, so.
How did you, after obviously getting through that initial first stage of grief and loss, how did you start to move through these things and process what happened and your thoughts?
It's a slow process because we chose to, you don't have to, we chose to get an autopsy because he was a normal baby. There was no reason for him to die in himself. Like he was a completely anatomically correct, perfect baby. There's no reason for him to die. The only anomaly was which we didn't know while I was actually pregnant, was his cord was a velamentous cord insertion. It was also hypercoiled and extra long. So we had this kind of trifecta of really bad things. So his blood supply and oxygen, his system was under a great deal of pressure when I was pregnant and we didn't know. And there was no reason to know. Most times when a baby has a velamentous cord or one of those other anomalies, they see a reduced growth because baby's not getting as much nutrition or they're just not being supported as well.
So there's some indication that there's something.
Yes, usually there is, but because he was a big baby, there was no reason to even think that there was an issue. So even if we had have known that he had this condition with his cord and placenta, it probably wouldn't have changed the outcome unless we delivered C-section extremely early. Most likely. And because we had all three, like it's very uncommon to have all three of those anomalies or abnormalities with that system.
So obviously with a loss and with birth and these sorts of things, we don't always know why these things happen.
No.
Is that the main theory as to why?
So I wanted to get the autopsy because I was concerned that I was thinking, God, tell me I didn't eat something that had some kind of, like soft cheese, or I was thinking hopefully I didn't accidentally kill him, which I was really concerned about. And that came back as, there was no other reason. I do have my suspicions that I don't know if I believe in coincidences. So the day before his death, I did go to that doctor's appointment and I had an iron infusion. And in some very, very rare cases, the iron infusion can increase the platelets in your blood and therefore making your blood thicker. I think that perhaps that put pressure on an already under pressure system and potentially just made it so difficult for for the placenta to work that it just stopped. And, it could have been that I feel like it was that. And so I feel a certain amount of guilt in that I decided to have the infusion, but there was no reason to not have it, at the time. Like, you don't think that something that a doctor's going to prescribe you, or is, I imagine as well for people who are anemic in pregnancy, it's encouraged. And I tried the tablets with Penny when I was pregnant with her, and I just got so incredibly sick. So I was like, yeah, give me the infusion. I'm not going to even waste time with the tablets.
Yeah, there's no way of knowing that was going to happen. I mean, with these things and coming to decisions in your birth, it needs to be a decision that you all make together. And unfortunately, with any kind of intervention, there's always a possibility of
that's exactly right. But
something.
And that's the thing, like, we don't know. I've spoken to my doctor about it as well, and she said it is a possibility, but it's one of those things that is so rare that they're never going to say don't do an iron infusion, because one, you probably need to have this system which is in such incredible pressure in the first place for that to even have an impact on someone's pregnancy. So it could have been that. It could have just been that he just wasn't meant to be. And that's a huge part of how I've coped, in that I've decided, you know what, this had to happen so that I can meet my next baby.
Okay.
So, yeah, the processing of it all after it happened took a really long time, because we went through that waiting for the results for the autopsy, and then waiting once they've come through, he's technically a person, so we had to get a birth certificate and a death certificate, and he had to go through like a funeral home and everything like that. So we had to pick a casket. Not a cask of wine. Yeah, I had a few of those. I definitely had a few of those. No, we had to pick a casket and just decide how we were going to lay him to rest, basically. So it was a lot of stuff that and it costs so much as well. Like, that I was so surprised. Like, my nana actually paid for his
the crematorium.
My nana actually paid for all his funeral costs and crematorium. So I was like, oh, Nana. I was like, nanas shouldn't be doing that for their grandbabies. Like, what the hell? So anyway, she paid for all of that because it's like a ridiculous amount of money. Well, it's not ridiculous, but that's just how much it costs.
Expensive.
Very expensive. Yeah. So just waiting for all those things to line up. So from the time that he actually died to the point where we had him back, would have been like a month. So, and it was like waiting for that, waiting to get him back and to actually have a service for him. It wasn't really until then that we could be like, oh, this chapter is kind of closed, sort of thing.
Through, yeah.
Yeah.
And get your closure. Or say your goodbyes, I suppose.
Yeah. See, that's exactly right. So,
and how did you talk this all through with Penny?
She was almost 2, and she didn't really understand even the concept of pregnancy, I don't think. Like, I don't think they really get it. So she wasn't really impacted. She knew that I was crying a lot, and she mentioned it a few times, like, why are you crying again, Mum? Things like that. But otherwise, she knows all about him. Like, I actually got in the hospital, and once I'd returned from the birthing suite, they had this little box, and I imagine it's similar, like it'd be similar to the same kind of box you get once you've had a live child. It's got like a teddy bear in it and like all these pamphlets of stuff. Whereas for me, it was pamphlets about chaplaincy and all the other services for counselling and things like that. But they had this little teddy bear in there. So I took her the teddy bear home and I said to her that her brother couldn't come home, but he decided to give her this teddy bear. And she is her favourite teddy bear even still today, and we call that teddy bear Billy because like William, Billy. So it's Billy and it's still her favourite teddy, and she often will say things like, oh, my brother got me this because he couldn't come home.
That's...
And I remember saying to her once, she was like, so where is William then if he died? And I was like, well, and I just was like, this is in the car. And I was like, oh, I wasn't prepared for this deep conversation at this point. And I said to her, I was like, oh, he's a shooting star now. I just kind of came up with something.
Yeah.
She's like, what do you mean he's a shooting star? And I said, yeah, so we all become shooting stars when we die. And I said, one day I'll be a shooting star and one day you'll be a shooting star as well. And she's like, oh, she's like, that sounds really scary. I said, that's okay. I'll be up there. I'll be waiting for you. And she's like, well, will you hold my hand? I was like, oh my gosh. I said, yes, I'll be holding your hand and William will be there. And she's like, oh, that sounds like really good fun. I can't wait to be a shooting star. And I'm like, oh, damn it. I've made this too appealing.
Yeah, you're like, yes, you can wait there to be a shooting star.
Let's just wait for becoming shooting stars.
Oh.
Yeah, so she's got this little teddy bear from William.
Gorgeous.
And, yeah, she loves it. It's just still her most favourite teddy bear. She takes it everywhere. Like, you know, it's in her bed. If we go somewhere, it comes with us. So,
oh my gosh,
yeah.
that's amazing
so actually, I've had like just a really odd, like it was, we were down at my sister's, and at this point we had my son Ewan, who is 2 now. So I had my 2 nephews and Penny and Ewan, and Penny's holding Billy. And I was like, oh, it's like a photo. And my sister took a photo of it. And I was like, oh, it's all of them in one photo.
Oh, my gosh.
It was so nice. So I was just like, oh, he's kind of like part of our family.
That's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That he's there. He's around.
Yeah. It was like actually when I saw the basket in the room, I was like, oh, thanks. I was like, thanks for the teddy bear that I can't give to my child because my child's dead. But then I was like, oh, I'll give it to my other one.
There's a reason for it.
And actually it was like as soon as I got in there and I saw it, like I actually was cuddling that bear to go to sleep because I was like, I just needed something to hold.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you mentioned there that you've got another son.
Yes.
Ewan.
So, well...
But before that...
it doesn't... Yeah, the story kind of still takes another dive.
So after this pregnancy and birth, after William...
Yes.
How long until you decide to try again?
So I tried... Oh, gosh. It would have been maybe 3 months. Yeah, it would have been 3 months because the next little girl that we had at 18 weeks, her due date would have been around about the same as what William's would have been if he had been born. So, yeah, it would have been maybe 3 months. So, yeah, we decided to try again. And the nurses at the IVF clinic are just some of the most amazing nurses you've ever met. Like I literally walked in and they were like crying. Like when I told them, because I obviously called and I said, like, because there's so many people that I had to tell that that I'd lost William. I had to call the fertility clinic and say that baby died.
I'm coming back.
And they were like, what? So
are those conversations really hard, or did you work out a way to try to switch off and compartmentalize just to get through those conversations? I kind of
just became quite stoic with it and just kind of held it together for most of the time. Like I think I probably cried a little bit with the nurses, but just generally, like I did bump into a few people after I had William because I was so pregnant at 29 weeks. You know, it's not. You can't hide that. You're proper pregnant, you know. You've got a big belly, and I had quite a few friends who were pregnant at the same time. Yeah, it was quite difficult actually coming back, and people going, "Oh, did you have your baby?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." And like, "Oh, what did you call him?" And they're all excited, and then and I'm like, "Yeah, he actually passed away." And then it was quite confronting the first few times because when I would say it, the shock and horror on these people's faces, and then they'd start crying, and then I'd be comforting them, and I was like, it was just it's a really bizarre kind of, it's really bizarre.
Like how to navigate that conversation because you don't want to...
I don't want to upset them, but I'm like, I also need...
But this happened.
This happened, and I don't want to not because otherwise they're going to go along thinking that my baby's alive. And then, so anyway, yeah, there was a few tough conversations, but I kind of got used to it. And even now, like in conversations, like obviously I'm bawling my eyes out here, but generally now in conversations, I can quite happily talk about William. And, you know, I try and very much keep him as, like, I think the most difficult thing, is probably when people ask me how many kids I've got. Yeah. Because I feel like I personally really want to include the children that I've lost. Like I would say 4, but I only have 2 that are alive. So
what do you say?
I just say 2. Or if it's someone, it just depends as well. Like, you kind of have to read the situation, and it depends how the questions are asked. And they say, "Oh, how many?" Like, you know, it just depends on the casualness of that conversation, I suppose.
No, it's such a tricky one.
Yeah, but it's kind of like I don't want to pretend that my son didn't live. Like, yeah, I don't want to not include one of my children. I feel terrible for that. I was like, you don't want to. Yeah, it's one of your children, sort of thing. So
he was born.
Yeah,
he was here.
So it's kind of a tricky one. And so I avoid asking people that question now, though. As a result, like I'll ask it in a way that
they can answer
the question, sort of thing. So it would be like, "Oh, do you have another son?" Or I'll say, "Do you have a brother?"
Yeah.
Rather than saying, "Oh, how many kids have you got?" kind of thing. So, or, you know, I'll try and ask it in a cryptic way that I'm not potentially asking, because once you have one, once you have a stillborn, you start hearing all these other stories of like, "Oh yeah, that person had a stillborn as well." Or even my nana was like, "I had a stillborn," and I was like, "Did you?" So, just sort of kind of opens up this conversation with a lot of other people who probably, just don't count their children as their children.
I think stillborns and miscarriages and, you know, all of that areas, different grey areas on how we define life.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And so, yeah, there's so much of this out there that we don't know, that we don't talk about, because it's vulnerable, it's scary, and it's hard at times. So yeah, it's
I had a few times where I'd say, "Oh yeah, I actually had a child at 29 weeks who was stillborn." They'll have been telling me that they'd had a miscarriage, and they go, "Oh, mine wasn't as bad as yours," and I'm like, "Yes, it was. You lost a child as well. Like it doesn't matter at what stage. Like you lost your hope. You had these hopes and these dreams and this life planned around this tiny human, and that got taken away from you. So it's not." It's probably it may be more traumatic in the physical sort of things, but he still lost a child. So I've actually found that a few times that people are like, "Oh, I had a miscarriage, but it's not as bad as what you had." And I'm like, well, I feel like it's the same. It's like, don't make yours any less. Like you still had a loss. Like it doesn't matter at what stage you lost a child as well.
That's their story and this is your story.
Exactly.
And both have their place and value.
Yes.
Yeah. And so your daughter.
Yes.
How old or how far through was?
I had quite a bit of anxiety about this pregnancy, but everything was kind of going completely normal, and I even forgot to book in my 12-week scan. I ended up having my 12-week scan at 15 weeks, and I ended up getting a harmony test as well. And then we got the harmony test back to say that she was T21. And so that was devastating. We'd always decided, even before we fell pregnant, that if we were to ever have a child with a severe disability, that we wouldn't continue with a pregnancy. Because it took us so much to get to this point, I was like, surely not. Surely it's a mistake. So we ended up going and having a amniocentesis, which is quite painful. But when we were at King Eddie and we were having the amniocentesis, the doctor there, the paediatrician, I'm not sure what his actual degree or but he was a really up there, he was the senior person who had all this experience in things. Anyway, he was doing an ultrasound and he was also doing the amniocentesis, and throughout the ultrasound, before we actually began the amniocentesis, he actually pointed out so many physical disabilities that she had. And he said, even if this child, he said, have you decided what you're going to do? Like, this is before we did the amniocentesis. And we're like, well, yeah, we're pretty sure we're going to terminate the pregnancy. He was like, I'm so glad that you've said that, because even if this child didn't have T21, it would be a matter of if it survived pregnancy, if it survived birth, and then if it survived its first few hours of life because of the heart deformities and the physical disabilities that this child had. And he said it's just not a life that anyone deserves. And so he was like, I'm really glad that that's where you've landed. So then even when he did that, like when he did the scan, I was like, I don't even feel like we need to do the amnio anymore, because he pointed out so much that was physically wrong with her that I was like, there's no way we could bring this child into the planet even if it didn't have T21. Like, it would just be cruel. So anyway, we did the amnio, and then we waited.
For the listeners, the amniocentesis, can you explain that process?
Basically, they have a very long needle, and they put that in right in the centre of your belly, and it goes through your uterus, and it just collects some of the cells, the liquid, the amniotic fluid, which contains the cells of the child, and then they can actually check the DNA of that child against the skin cells, so they can actually see 100% sure, yes, this child has got is T21, or what disability that child may have. So it's just really basically just 100% stamp certified, yes, this is what your child has. And because I just wanted to be so 100% sure, because I have a friend who had a child diagnosed with something, I can't remember, but it was something, I think it's that thing where there's like too much fluid in there and there's a potential for a really severe disability. And their child got diagnosed with that at 18 weeks, and they ended up having terminating that child at 20 weeks, and the autopsy came back as that child being completely normal.
Oh my God.
So I was like, I'm not going to be I can't do that. And
because it's still so hard to see and tell what's going on in there. There's still little.
And and this other couple, like, they've had a little son since, and they're as well, like, I lent really heavily on her at this time, because I was like, what do I do? Like, how did you cope? How did you go through this? Because I don't know what to think. Like, I feel really terrible because I'm terminating this child, but what kind of life would this child have if I didn't? And it's such a heated topic. It's not that anyone's ever said to me that abortion or terminating a pregnancy is bad, but because you hear it in the media and you hear, and the campaign for anti-abortion, especially in America, is so loud. And you just think, I really don't want to upset someone or I really don't want to have this conversation with someone where they're going to tell me that I'm doing the wrong thing, because it's the right thing for me to do and the right thing for this child as well.
And only you and your husband can come up with that decision.
And I just was like, do I tell people that I've had this? Because I don't want someone to tell me that I did the wrong thing, or tell me that their opinion that I've murdered a child. And
regardless, it's not an easy decision.
Yeah, I was like, do you think it was what I wanted to do? Like, I didn't want to do it. It wasn't. And so that's the thing. Like, people have said, is it an easy decision? I'm like, it was an easy decision because we decided from the very beginning that we weren't going to have a child with a disability. And because we had our daughter, it just wasn't, we didn't want to put that on her. But also we didn't want to put this on this child. So it was an easy decision in that, but it's still a really difficult decision because there's always that what if. But then when we had the amnio, I was like, there's no doubt in my mind that this child is not for us. Yeah, so we had from the amnio, we had maybe 5 days of just kind of waiting around for the result. And then it was going to be, how do you want to terminate this pregnancy? I decided to give birth. I didn't want to do a medical removal because it just sounded too violent for me. So I was
How many weeks were you, sorry?
So I was 18 weeks pregnant when we actually gave birth. And yeah, so we went up to King Eddie and I took the tablets, and it was, my husband struggled a lot more with it than I did with this pregnancy. He disconnected again. He totally removed himself from this pregnancy. He was like, get it out. I don't even want to think about you having a child in your tummy at the moment. And for me, I was like, this was different in that I was like, no, I'm not going to react like that this time. So I actually I was really intentional with the way that I spoke about her and the way that I thought about her. And so that the 2 weeks between the harmony test coming back and giving birth to her, I was constantly holding, like at that time you don't really have a belly, but I was constantly holding my belly and trying to send as much love to her as possible. And I was telling her all the time that I loved her and that I was sorry and that, you know, that she was like, it was just like trying to explaining to her and just
connecting with
her and just being so intentional about the way that I thought of her and thought about her. So like my husband was this total opposite and I'm like, it's okay. Like she's just a baby. It's not her fault. Like let's just love her. Like this is who she is and this is the only time we're going to have with her as well. And so I have a lot more fond memories of those last moments we called her Poppy. I have these really fond moments, the final moments that I had with her because I had the time to really think about how I wanted to react to this moment. Whereas with William, it was just like, bam, your baby's passed away and you're going to have it like tomorrow.
It was unexpected.
And so as well, I think with William, I'm like, I didn't appreciate or think about my pregnancy. Like, you know, I was just going through the day-to-day motions. I wasn't like nurturing my belly or like thinking about like all putting loving memories and thoughts into him. And like, I was just like getting on with it. I had a 2-year-old. I was like, yep, or almost 2-year-old. I was just getting the day done and like getting home to put my feet up. And so, but with Poppy, I had this time to kind of like really connect with her. And so, you know, the last moments of her life for me were really beautiful. I'm going to cry again. I'll try not to. So I was in the hospital and I think my husband was like really hungry. So we had this little suite to ourselves and I'd had the medication and I was basically just waiting for labour to start. And he went off to go and get a beer or something because we're in the city. He went off and got a beer and some dinner. And so at that time the sun was setting and our window was like looking right at the sunset. And I could see the beach because King Eddie's actually quite close to the beach. And so I could see the sun setting, just a glimpse of water, and I just stood there watching the sun go down and holding my belly and swaying and singing songs. It was just like this really beautiful moment and the best thing that I could do for her in her final hours sort of thing. Like, so I'm really glad that I got to give her that and just constantly telling her that I loved her and that I was sorry. And yeah, it was just like a really beautiful moment. Giving birth to a baby at 18 weeks is fairly easy. Like she was very small, as all 18-week babies are, but definitely not what I expected to see, I suppose, because she's born. She's still very pink. She's still see-through. She's still very much a fetus. And so when I actually gave birth to her, the midwife or the nurse came in and she took her away and they actually brought her back with a tiny little beanie on and wrapped up in like a little blanket and it was very cute. But on the same token, I was like, I don't need to hold this back. Like I held her. They brought her in a tiny little basket and she was in this little tiny basket, but she was just so tiny and so raw. I suppose that sounds really. I don't want to get too graphic because. It was like people have said to me, oh, was she just gorgeous? And I'm like, oh, she really wasn't. Like, she looked like a fetus. Like,
she wasn't like
she wasn't like a full proper baby yet. Yeah. You know, she was still very pink and red, and you know, although she had a little face, everything wasn't quite in the right spot yet, and she was still a little bit like fish-like, I suppose. But she was still cute because she had a little beanie on and she had this little tiny basket with a little tiny teddy bear. And so they took little handprints for her. And so I've got handprints of William as well, but I've got little tiny handprints and footprints from her, and they're only like a 10-cent piece, like as big as a 10-cent piece.
Tiny.
So she was super tiny, and giving birth was, you know, just sitting on the toilet, and it was basically the same sort of feeling of just doing that.
So they still sort of induce labour and you just go through the normal labour process.
Yeah.
And
so I did ask them, I was really sure to ask them like how the drugs worked. Like, is she going to feel any pain? And they just said it literally just this drug will turn off the placenta, so she'll just go to sleep. And then this drug will induce labour. So there was basically a drug to end the pregnant or kill the baby I know.
Okay.
Sorry.
End the pregnancy. Yeah.
End the pregnancy. I know. I was like, how do I say this nicely? And I ended up saying it really not nicely. Here's a drug that, will stop your baby's heart or, end the pregnancy, and this one will make you have the baby or the product. It was actually quite nice. Probably the worst thing about it was just being at King Eddie.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really bad there. Well, it's a lot of high...
it's intensive sort of...
Yeah, the people that are generally going to King Eddie if they're pregnant, they're not in the best ways. There's a lot of women out the front smoking. There are a lot of, not all of the patients that are going to King Eddie are like that, but the ones that you see out the front and as you're walking into the hospital definitely are. And I was just walking there, I'm like, you bitches.
You're not looking after your body.
I was like, how dare you? I'm walking in here for the 10th time, or not the 10th, but, again, here I am again doing this, and you guys are just, well, what are you doing?
Yeah, trashing your body.
The doctor actually said to us when we were there, he's like, I'm really sorry that you had to walk in and you probably saw all the women out the front. And I was like, yeah, I did. I said it wasn't great. And he was like, yeah, feel free to punch them on your way out. I was like, oh, okay. So is he prescribing that as a doctor?
Yeah.
He's like, I certainly am. Because I was like, yeah, you guys are working your asses off trying to keep these babies alive, and these parents are just doing nothing to help you. And so he's like, yep, that's pretty much our job here.
Sad.
So, it was pretty horrible going into King Eddie, but that all happened and the recovery was really quick. It was really fine, and we ended up getting her, because she wasn't 21 weeks, which you have to be considered a human. We didn't have to do a death certificate or anything like that. She got cremated and we got her remains, and it was a really simple sort of process.
Okay. Two very different processes, and I think it's all around... it sort of reminds me of another podcast interview that I've done recently that hasn't come out yet, but this concept of grief but also trauma and change of identity, and I think that is with William, where you had a certain identity that you were going to be stepping into being his mum and having him here, and he was taken away unexpectedly.
Yes.
And this other birth with Poppy, I don't want to get Poppy and Penny mixed up.
I know, difficult.
Was a time where you were able to prepare and process.
It definitely set me up to be able to handle that situation a lot better. Don't want to have to do it again.
No, of course not.
But definitely William definitely made me stronger in definitely being able to, I think, take the time to think about how I wanted to react to the moment, because I was so disappointed in the way that I reacted to him dying. And I get that it was just like a survival technique for me at that point, but as well, like, just being able to take that time and really think about how I wanted to be, and being intentional. And he definitely set me up, taught me a lot of things in that moment, definitely.
So after this birth, you decided again you were going to keep trying because you wanted to have another baby.
Yes. So at this point, my husband, I was kind of like, I am done. I don't think I can do this again. I was like, I would be quite happy to not do this again, because I was just so over it. And my husband was like, no, we are not ending on this note. We cannot be defeated and this be our story. So he didn't obviously he didn't force me having another baby, but he was like, I would really like to go again, and I don't want our story to end here. And I was like, okay, let's go again and we'll see what happens.
So how long did you give yourself to sort of process those emotions and move
to the next stage? She was born in the April, and I would have had... So it would have been maybe 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah, I did take a pretty big breather after Poppy. Mm-hmm. Well, I say big. It was big to me because, I look at that as time wasted again. But it would have been maybe 5 or 6 months of a break.
Okay.
I think we tried again in October. We tried in the October. So she was born in April, and we tried in October, and that's when we fell pregnant with Ewan with that next cycle, and that was an extremely stressful pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
COVID came out.
Oh, okay.
I was like, of course, I'm pregnant. there's a global pandemic as well, like because my doctor now was so highly stressed from it all. She was like, she's like, I love you, but can this be the last one? I was like, I promise this will be the last one. So, yeah, I was under the thumb very much with that pregnancy, being made sure like I was having regular blood tests, regular scans. Like I had so many scans of this baby. So I didn't know the gender for Penny, and I did know the gender for William, and their pregnancies were so different. So when I fell pregnant with Poppy, I knew straight away that I was having a girl. And then when I was pregnant with Ewan, I knew straight away that I was having a boy, but I didn't know. Yeah, like, so I knew, but obviously I didn't have.
That's so strange. You just had a feeling that.
Oh, well, there was two things. When I was pregnant with the girls, I got at 6 weeks, I got angioedema and urticaria. So like bad. Like my lips swelled up, my eyes swelled up. I had these plaque hives all over me with Penny, and I got it, but not as bad with Poppy. But I didn't get it with either of the boys' pregnancies. But as well, I was having so many scans that I saw things in these scans, and I was like, that's definitely a penis. That's definitely a boy. So I just knew, like, and then there was one, we had, at one point they're like, oh yeah, we hear a murmur, so you have to go back up to Perth for a cardiologist. And I was like, of course. And then anyway, we walked in, he goes, oh, so do you know if you're having a boy or a girl? And I was like, no, we don't know.
So he knew.
Yeah, and I was like, when we left, I was like, I feel like he told us we were having a boy, and Scott's like, yeah, he told us we're having a boy. I was like, I already knew that anyway. But yeah, obviously we hadn't had anyone actually tell us that we were having a boy, but he kind of accidentally let it slip. I was so extremely stressed during this pregnancy.
Because
anxious.
You were worried about losing the baby?
I was worried about losing it. I was worried that this was not going to be, that this was just going to end up in the same shit show that the last two kind of ended up in. Yeah, and because I was having constant contact with my doctor and scans and stuff, to have that reassurance that he was fine, or this baby was fine, that I just couldn't relax, and I just really wanted it out. So I wanted him out. I just wanted to have him. I just wanted him to be out and safe. Like for me, I was thinking the safest place for this baby is to just be born so I can look after it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh no, cot death.
I know. That's the thing, isn't it? There's always something that can stress you out as a mum, regardless. And I mean, obviously I haven't gone through what you've been through, but I remember even from the first point of knowing that I was pregnant and going, the first 3 months, you're so nervous, like you don't want to lose it, you want to hold on to it. And then I remember getting into my mind and thinking there's always going to be something that stresses you out, that you're going to lose that baby. Yeah. And it's like, how do you capture that? Yeah. And I could just imagine that being like 100,000-fold with your
there's just
pregnancy.
This insecurity about of this pregnancy, of it actually becoming a child. So I think it was like 35 weeks, because I had given birth at 35 weeks with PJ, they were like, okay, we want to make sure that you're not going to give birth again at 35 weeks. So at 35 weeks, I was having regular ECGs like every other day to make sure that everything was going fine, and that he was doing what he normally did. But for me, I just want to get to 37 weeks. I don't want to birth anywhere else. I just want to birth in Bustleton at 37 weeks. Yeah, 37 weeks rolled around, and I saw my doctor, and she's like, all right, let's get this show on the road. And I was like, perfect. So I was like, we had a stretch and sweep. She's like, I'm not supposed to, but we did stretch and sweep. And I think I did a stretch and sweep at about 2 o'clock. I went and had castor oil at like 3 o'clock.
Start bouncing on a ball and eating chili.
A couple of days before that, we were having sex. I was like, yeah, let's just do everything to get this kid out. There was even a cold, low pressure system, like a storm that night. I was like, yes, I am just ticking all the boxes. So the day that I had the stretch and sweep and the castor oil and the storm, I had the castor oil at 3. By 7 p.m, I was having contractions. And then so I went to the hospital. My husband was at work again. Went to the hospital, and they're like, yeah, not just yet, but it's going to happen. And so I messaged my husband. I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to happen tonight. And then at about 11 o'clock, I was like, yeah, this is game on. Because so even that night I said to Scott, I was like, I'm just going to stay at mum and dad's, because that way I don't have to put PJ into the car, drive her over to mum and dad's. I was like, we'll just stay here. She can stay asleep. I'll just knock on mum's door.
I'll just duck out for a second and have a baby.
I'll just knock on mum's door and be like, okay, I'm going down to the hospital now. So yeah, like at 11 o'clock, I just tap the door. I'm like, okay, I'm going to head back down to the hospital. I'm in labour now. So I just drove myself down there and I messaged my husband. I'm like, yeah, you might want to come down because I'm not going anywhere anymore. And I said to the lady, like, so can I have my epidural yet? And she's like, not just yet. We'll just wait and see. And then in the next half an hour, I had an epidural. And so like by the time I'd contacted my husband to come back from Bustleton, when the nurse said no epidural, he got to Bustleton and I had an epidural. I was just sitting there with my lemonade. I'm like, this is great. Let's just get this show on the road. So, and my doctor was on shift as well, on call. So I was like, perfect. I timed it perfectly.
So good.
I know. So
you never get your doctor.
I know. I got my doctor as well. And she was like, hey. And I was like, I told you. I said, I'm having him on 37 weeks. I think I had him at 37 and 2, I think, by the time all the stretches and sweeps and all that had happened. But yeah, so everything else, well, it wasn't a straightforward birth. Yeah, he was turned around again. He was posterior, and then he started turning around in the canal and I couldn't get him out. So it got to the point where she was like, if you can't get this kid out in the next hour or 20 minutes, probably 20 minutes, she's like, I'm calling the doctor. She's like, I'm actually going to call the doctors now. If you can't get the baby out by the time they get here, you're going to go in for a C-section. And I was like, oh, no way. So I got really serious at that point. The doctors were there and one of the other peds was looking and he's like, nah, the baby's too low now. We can't do the C-section. You're just going to have to get him out. And so anyway, I eventually pushed him out, but he was not breathing. He wasn't blue, but he didn't breathe. So he was on CPR vent. He was being breathed for about 3 minutes when he came out.
Oh my gosh. Okay, hang on. Slow down.
I know, there's so many bits to my story.
So many things to your story. So they were going to do a C-section, yes, but that ended up not being the best option.
No, I managed to get him out, yeah. I got him low enough to the point where they were like, yeah.
Push. And so when he came out, what did they just whisk him away straight away?
Yeah, so I was on all fours, so they kind of just, rugby threw him to me and he just wasn't, he was still attached to the cord, so he still had oxygen. Like there was no issue there in that was kind of still working for him, but he just didn't take his breath and he wasn't crying. And he was kind of moving a little bit, I suppose. But they kind of just quickly snatched him and took him to the heater thing. And at that time, I actually didn't even notice what was going on because with my first pregnancy with Penny, she got taken away from me quite quickly as well because I had to go and have my placenta removed. So for me, they're like, oh, we're just going to take him over here. And they're like, so the midwives had me just delivering the placenta, and I looked at Scott and he was looking really stressed and I'm like, chill man, it's fine. He's like, well, no, what's going on over there? And I'm like, it's fine. They're saying that because they kept going, he's looking great, his blood pressure's fine, he's a happy, healthy baby. They weren't saying he wasn't breathing, but Scott was looking going, no, something's not right. I'm going, chill out, man.
So he's watching them quickly working.
They're watching him work on the baby.
Yeah, but you're obviously...
I'm like in this
and
other
that's
world.
Probably a better place for you to be just trying to get your...
Yeah, I had no idea what was going on. But anyway, 3 minutes later or thereabouts, they gave him back to me and they're like, here you go, here's your baby. They didn't say anything about it. Okay. And so I had no idea. But he did have this little tag on his foot, like a little oxygen thing on his foot. Yeah. And so for the rest of the night, everyone kept coming in and at one point they said, oh, we're just going to take baby away for a few more tests. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I didn't think anything of it. What they were doing is they were doing x-rays to check his lungs, doing more blood tests to check because there's a certain level in their blood when they don't breathe when they first come out that if it doesn't steadily increase, then it would have been a trip to King Eddie or the Children's Hospital or something like that. But his blood work all looked fine and everything. So, but at this time they weren't telling me this at this time of day. So I think I gave birth to him at about 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then at like 8 o'clock, my doctor came in. She's like, okay, let's talk about the birth. I'm like, yeah, what about it? And she's like, well, didn't go to plan. And I was like, oh, really? And so then that's when they were telling me all about it. I'm like, oh, so that's what's been going on. And they're like, yeah, so you're going to stay here for a few days so we can keep an eye on baby. And I was like, oh, okay then. And so for me...
So for you, it was like, no, it did go to plan. I've got my baby out.
Yeah, I was like, everything's fine. But she was like, no, it didn't go to plan. Okay. And I was like, oh, okay, well,
As long as they're monitoring him and
it.
he was being looked after, it was good
fine
for you.
Yeah, I was like,
great.
okay, and there was a little beeper thing so that if his O2 went any lower than something, that it would beep. And
so was he fine in the end? There wasn't anything
fine.
after that went wrong?
It doesn't, like, it's not a precursor to anything else down the track. He's not going to have issues with anything. Like 3 minutes to be having like breathing for them is not really that long. Like they've had a kid for 18 hours come out be completely normal. Like they were like, this is, let's put this into perspective here. We've had kids flown because they've just not started breathing. It's just that there's something that just hasn't kick-started their natural reaction or their natural trigger to breathe. So it could be that he went to breathe in during labour but couldn't. So he went, oh, well, I'm not meant to do it yet, so I'll just
wait.
I'll just wait. But then it didn't kickstart sort of thing. So it could have been that, or it could have just been that he was exhausted. It could have been anything. So
yeah.
Well, it wasn't really stressful for me, but my husband was pretty stressed.
Oh, your poor husband as well. He's been through just
he's very damaged from the whole process.
So I want to know, what was it like seeing your daughter meet your son for the first time and seeing your family complete?
Oh, it was pretty amazing. She's not the most maternal child. So for her to see him, she was like, oh yeah, it's okay. Like, what does it do? I was like, oh, he's a baby, you know, is this your brother? And she's like, oh, cool. Can I have a biscuit?
Yeah.
Okay, any food? Yeah. So, yeah, it was lovely seeing her meet him, but she just wasn't really that interested. So there's about 4 years between them. But, yeah, she's just not the maternal type, which is fine.
I was going to say, it sounds like what Mum wasn't the maternal type either before this whole process.
No, I wasn't. But, yeah, she's still not paternal. She's still like, oh, how long is this guy hanging around for? Like, still a while yet, kiddo.
Wherever. Who's your brother?
Then she'll be like, oh, I wish I had a sister. And I was like, yeah, well, you've got a brother. Yeah, so, yeah, it was really lovely. It was actually just kind of like, it was like a big sigh of relief, but as well, like, still that anxiety of the insecurity of this child, you know, really, like, you know, there's the first couple of weeks or the first 2 months of them being alive that you're like, is this real? Like, is this going to last, sort of thing? And that's kind of how I felt like I was feeling for that entire, you know, first 6 weeks, was like, okay, are we sure baby's going to be here forever now? Like, is this it? So, yeah, it's just that insecurity that I really had to work through from there. But, yeah, the relief of kind of going, and in my mind, like, in deep inside, I was like, if this baby should die, I'm not doing it again. I'm done. Like, this is it for me. I was like, I am not doing this ever again. I can't put myself through it. I can't put my husband through it. It's just, we've got PJ. Let's just be happy with 3 of us, sort of thing. And, like, at the time, like, I was thinking, oh, yeah, I'll give Penny a sibling and they'll have like a best friend forever. It's actually Fight Club in my house. Like, it is serious. I've ruined her life by getting her a sibling. So I've gone through all this traumatic stuff to give her a sibling. Be like, here you go. And she's just like, I don't want it.
When they're older, you never know. Maybe they will come together. And so at the start of this conversation, you mentioned to me that you had those 12 embryos.
Yes.
And you were wondering, you were looking at them.
Yep.
And you were, I'm never going to use all of them.
I'm not doing all this. I'm not doing this 12 times. There's no way.
So this leads us into the next part of your story,
Yes.
which is going to be the next part of this podcast, because we're going to split it into 2. And you're going to talk to us about what happened with the other embryos.
Yes, what did happen?